And Heather Dinich has moved on to Chicago, covering the story, of course, for all of us. Heather, thank you for the time. And I know you've been there all day. What has been going on? What do we know?
Well, Paul, we know that the 10 FBS commissioners and Notre Dame Athletic Director Jack Swarbrick began their meetings this afternoon. It's possible they could continue their meetings later this evening. I've been speaking to some people who are in the room, and they have told me that there's a good foundation, that the proposal that was released last Thursday was very thoughtful, and there is some initial support from some very powerful people about the 12 teams, but it's the nitty-gritty that they're going to get into this afternoon and more tomorrow morning in terms of the top 4 seeds. Does everybody agree that they don't get any home games? Does everybody agree that the first round is at home? How do their university presidents in each conference feel that there could be 17 games played? They'll talk about the calendar. They will talk about the bowls and how they are integrated into those things. There were some commissioners who went into these meetings thinking that this could be done before the contract expires. We're entering the 8th season of a 12-year contract, and some people think it can be done before then. Some people are not as convinced. So that's what they're talking about this afternoon and tomorrow morning. But I would be surprised, Paul, if they left here and didn't agree on 12. But the very first thing they have to talk about is the number of teams.
Yeah, Heather, let's talk about when this starts, because I remember we were together yesterday on ESPN, and that's a big deal, because with all of this momentum, and people are praising it and raving about it, but if we hear from these people in a couple of weeks or months, and they say, well, this is the plan, but it doesn't happen until 4 or 5 years down the road, many people think that's a real issue. So take us through what has to happen to make this sooner rather than later.
Well, what has to happen is the very first thing is here at these meetings in Chicago, they have to come to a consensus on the plan. And if they do, if they agree on the basis of a format, 12 teams, whatever it might be, then next Tuesday in Dallas on June 22nd, they would then present it to the 11 university presidents and chancellors who comprise the CFP's board of managers. Those are the people with the power to change the playoff. But at that point next Tuesday, if the presidents and chancellors give the commissioners green light, it's simply to do more work, to use the summer to figure out more specifics. How do the bowls tie in? All of those things I just spoke about. And then they would come back in September for another meeting. And September is the earliest point. That doesn't mean it's going to happen. These conversations could continue for much longer after September. But September is the earliest point that there could be an official announcement saying, yes, we're going to expand the playoff. Here's when, and this is what it's going to look like.
So, Heather, take us inside this room. I mean, who runs this meeting? And you said consensus, but you have a lot of varying opinions. I mean, how do they come to a conclusion?
Well, there's also a lot of egos in the room, conference-sized ones, I would go so far as to say. And how they get to a consensus is the same way, anyone else does sitting around a boardroom table. Nothing else has changed. They're still meeting. And I would say that people have to remember there were 4 people on the working group who spent 2 years coming up with this plan. There are 11 people total in the room looking at it for the first time together in person. That's significant. As Jack Swarbrick told me after the national championship last year, this isn't a Zoom conversation, right? So to be able to sit down and hash it out and go over those details, like I said, that's why somebody told me this might not happen in September in terms of figuring everything out and all the details. It could take longer than that. But just to be clear, Executive Director Bill Hancock has said it's not happening this year or next year. So formally a change and seeing the system change, the earliest that would happen is 3 years from now.
Yeah, Heather, I get all that, but this thing sounds fairly organized to me. I mean, you had this release a couple of months ago, the teaser, and then we had last week, and then we had a conference call. So it's hard for some people to believe that even though all these new voices are in the room, that they're going to buck the power brokers who came up with this. And I'm curious what you think about that. Yeah, there may be disagreement, there may be conversations, but how are these things going to be changed, though? And what would lead somebody to believe that it's the proposal that we've all read about and talked about will be undone?
Well, no, you're right. You make a great point, and I agree with you. And there have been people who have told me it's going to be hard to walk that back now that it's out there, right? But at the same time, everyone has to understand the process and has to understand that there's university presidents and chancellors who have to sign off on this. They care about the academic calendar. They care about the possibility of student athletes playing 17 games. So those are conversations that have to be had. I will tell you, like I said, I'll be surprised if everyone leaves Chicago and doesn't come to a consensus on 12 teams. But it's so many other things. I mean, the things that they're talking about in there go as deep a dive as home game tickets. How do you allocate that? How many does the away team get, right? All of those things have to be considered. Do we want to bring teams on the road from Georgia to East Lansing, Michigan in January or whatever it might be? I mean, those are deep dives, and they're going to continue to talk about that. It's not the foundation. I haven't spoken to anyone who's in that room who is wishy-washy on 12. There might be. That I'm not saying that there's not. I'm saying nobody's told me I don't like 12. But I will tell you that people have said, I want to know more. I want to know more about how it's going to work, exactly what it's going to look like. And oh, by the way, how much money are we going to get out of it?
And that's where I want to go next as we continue with Heather Dinich in Chicago, because Heather, you know, there's a big component of this that we don't really know about, and it's interesting because we both work for ESPN, but it would seem to me that they're going to play a big role in all of this. We had John Orand on here yesterday, the media reporter and columnist for Sports Business Journal, and he said he had heard, he's a reporter, that the network's enthusiasm for this current plan wasn't that high. Maybe that's posturing, maybe it's not. Because it is going to cost a lot more money, and he argued, I'm just relating what he had to say, and you know, John, that where that first weekend comes, it's just not that valuable a day of college football before Christmas when bowl games are already on the table. So how does that part of the puzzle get solved at some point, the network part of the puzzle?
You know, my pay grade isn't at that level, right? But in honesty, I mean, that's part of the equation. I mean, I was told that they didn't even go to ESPN until they have a plan. And as we sit here right now, they definitively don't have a plan. So, I don't have the answer as to what ESPN TV executives are thinking about this because I haven't spoken to them about it. But that being said, I've talked to people in that room who wanted to open the door to more networks, get other television partners in the conversation, or at least explore that opportunity. So absolutely a factor, as is how the Rose Bowl and Orange Bowl and Sugar Bowl and those contract bowls factor into that. That all ties together.
Heather, you're in Chicago, the home of the Big Ten, and the reason I bring that up is that there are those who theorize, and everyone's got a different theory, that the Big Ten and the Pac-12 and the Rose Bowl are really going to be the biggest obstacles in making this happen. We've always feared that, and then we heard this last week and go, well, that's great, everybody's on the same page, but you know, they may have been on the same page moving down the road, but how does that, what are you hearing in terms of the Big Ten, especially on unwinding this Rose Bowl situation now? Because that's a very valuable time slot, as we all know.
Well, it is, and I'm eager to ask Big Ten Commissioner Kevin Warren what he thinks about that, because those partnerships and that historic loyalty to the Rose Bowl, again, is a part of the conversation. And I wish I had a better answer for you on it, but that's one of the things that they're going to be talking about. And when I said that each conference has their own agenda, so to speak, in there, that's part of the Big Ten's alliance and allegiances, is that tie-in with the Rose Bowl. Same for the Pac-12. As you mentioned, but we've also heard the new Pac-12 commissioner and Larry Scott talk about how beneficial expansion would be to that conference. And I've spoken to university presidents and athletic directors and coaches in that conference who are all for not only expansion, but they are ready for those early kickoffs and whatever else they can do to get on TV.
Yeah, it almost seems like, Heather, the Big Ten, the Big Ten may not want to change, but you know, if the Big 12, if the Pac-12 doesn't change soon, there may not be a Pac-12 to worry about. I'm not suggesting you ask them that, but I'm just making an observation.